Hi everyone, for those that don't know me, my name is Kristy Coromandel and I'm an independent Stepping Up demonstrator here in Central Queensland, Australia. And for those that don't know me, I help card makers enhance your skills and build your creative confidence so you can effortlessly craft beautiful designs that you adore. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that this month we're looking at trying a new technique. And so this week we're going to focus all about heat embossing. So I'm going to share with you some little beginner tips about heat embossing and some of the tools that we use for that. Then we're going to do a quick fun project together, and I may even have a few extra samples at the end of this. So let's flip the camera and let's get started. So we're going to walk through some basic heat embossing, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tools and the tips and some of the out-of-the-box things that crafters kind of do to make heat embossing work even better for us. So first I'm going to be sharing with you all the tools that you're going to need to use heat embossing. So if you are an experienced crafter, you know all of this information, please don't turn away. Please don't disregard this video, because I guarantee you probably come across something that you're not doing currently that could actually help you with your heat embossing. So whether that's using a different tool that we're using or maybe a different product that we're using, I think you're going to get some good value information out of this session, even if it's just to see how somebody else does heat embossing. So we're going to start by showing you some of the different types of heat embossing and some of the products that we have here. So we're going to start with our Steppin' Up's Wow range. This is actually Wow, but Steppin' Up use this. So these are just some of the colors that I have here. This is our basics collection, and they're always coming out with more and more colors all the time. So this is just the ones that Steppin' Up currently have as well. So we've got clear, gloss, primary ebony, which is our black, and our bright white. Something I want to note as we're talking about these embossing powders, that the way that they're actually described tells you a lot about the type of embossing powder that you're going to be using. So for example, these here actually say regular. So that just says that these are normal granulars of embossing powder. If you have a really detailed image that you want to heat emboss in, you actually want to use an ultra fine embossing powder. So this regular would not be the best choice for that. So let me show you something else that I've got here. Now the other line that we actually have is our metallic range. So our metallic range comes in with our copper, silver and rich. And once again, these are regular, these aren't ultra fine. So these are great for normal embossing. They're not something I would use for if you want fine detail or anything like that. If you want fine detail, you need an embossing powder that has fine detail written on here, whereas these are the actually regular ones. Now, most people in their embossing stash really starts with a few different colors, and I would recommend that you get white, silver and gold. These are the colors that I use often and reach for time and time again. So these are definitely the colors that I really would recommend, but you're going to have lots of fun when you have adding other different colors or finishes into your embossing powder stash. Okay, so those are the embossing powders. Now when it comes to taking those embossing powders to stick to your project, you need an ink or a paint or a pigment ink that's really going to make those pigments adhere to the paper long enough that you can actually heat emboss them, so you can actually heat them with your heat tool. So there's a couple of different inks that I would recommend. So I've got two here. VersaMark has been my go-to for many, many years, mostly because it's super easy to work with and it's clear. So I can use it with whatever color of embossing powder that I like. Now that could be a problem if you're going to be embossing on white cardstock and you need to see where you actually stamp. So in that case, you might use a different color, but Steppin' Up don't have that. It's where you use a pigment ink. So I might not use white, but you can use any sort of pigment ink, an ink that does not going to dry very quickly. So if I was going to emboss with a different color embossing powder and I want to be able to see my image before I applied my embossing powder, I might actually use a colored pigment ink like this white ink right here. So you can see more examples of that throughout other examples that I'll share with you later. Now I'm going to talk about the most expensive part of investment, and that is your heat tool. Now I've had a lot of questions over the years. Can I use a hairdryer? Can I use some other type of tool? But I would really recommend getting the tool that's made for the job. In particular, people think that you can actually use a hairdryer for heating up your embossing powders, but that is simply not the case. If you think about it, you need that tool that's going to get so hot that's actually going to melt that powder. And if your hairdryer gets that hot, you probably wouldn't be using it on your hair at all. It'll actually fry your hair. So you have to have the tool that's going to get hotter than a hairdryer. So a heat embossing tool or heat tools or heat guns are specifically designed for heat embossing. And you're going to get a much better result if you use a tool that's actually made for the job. So this is the tool that I use and that I recommend. It is by Stampin' Up and it's sold by Stampin' Up. You can also get this from my online Stampin' Up store, and I'll provide the link for you below this video. So if you want to pick this up, I'll have a link for you below. Now this is a really fantastic heat tool, and I would just tell you right off the bat, I've had this tool since it first came out. So this is probably more than 10 years old and it's doing amazingly. So I love this because it has a very precision tip and it actually has this plastic casing around it. So it does protect you as well. So I do love this heat tool for a number of things. One, that we have this little stand here so we can actually sit it up straight so it's not touching your work surface when it does get hot. And this bit here does get really, really hot, so you don't really want to touch it, but we do have this little protective case right here for you. It also has 2 settings, which you'll see me use both settings today in the tutorial that I will share with you later. We have setting number 1, which is great for drying your ink, and then setting number 2, which is obviously great for heat embossing. So I definitely recommend investing in this heat tool right here. Now I did mention there's a couple of different other tools that you might use, and this is our Essentials additional kit. And one thing that comes in here is this powder tool. Oh, it's all embossing buddy. You can get also a bag or a little tool, or this one here, which is called an embossing buddy. Anything that's actually going to put down a slight coating of powder onto your cardstock, it's really going to help the embossing process. This is because you're handling the paper, you're touching it, and then you go and stamp it, and then you're touching it with all your fingerprints all over it, and then you go to stamp. All of those areas where you touch that cardstock, just because of any static or electricity that's in the air, you're going to run the risk of having those really fine granules of paper of this embossing powder sticking to areas of the cardstock that you don't want it. And that's when you get the really messy embossing images. If you're going for that look, that's great, something you could do on your own. But for the most part, we're looking for a super clean embossed image. And I really recommend using an embossing buddy to actually prep your cardstock, to prep your surface before you start stamping. It's something that's really going to help your heat embossing and to be sure you get a nice clean image. Now, another thing I want to share with you that I do with my powders is put them in a separate container. And I use this for my most popular powders that I do use all the time. Now, the reason why I put this in a separate container is so convenient. It's because this is my gold. You can hold your paper over that large box, sprinkle on your powder, and then shake it off right back into the container itself. It's awesome for those embossing powders that you use more frequently. Like for me, I use my white, I use my gold all the time. So it's a great time saver for me. Now, if you don't want to put all your powders in little boxes or spoons, you can always do some other things to kind of keep your embossing powder under control. And one thing right here is your Essentials kit right here. The other thing that you can do is also some scrap paper, and I'll give you a demonstration how both of these work in a little while. Some other times, some people use some coffee filters where you can take some off a stack. I don't tend to use that, but you can catch all the embossing powder into your coffee filters as well, and then funnel it back into the jar when you finish. So now that we've gone over quite a few different tools, one of the things that makes a lot of people is that embossing powder can actually go all over the place. It can be really, really messy. Now, I clean up the embossing powder with a couple of different things. One is like a wet one, a baby wipe, that really cleans my work surface really cleanly. You can use a micro cloth right here. So I have this on my desk and I use that also, and it picks up my glitter and my embossing powder. And it's really granular onto my work surface as well. So they're really great and fantastic to use as well. So let's work through some different scenarios of actually using our embossing powder, using some different types of inks and embossing powders, and some different type of cleaning up methods as well. So I'm just going to share you with this little image right here. So I'm going to actually touch my cardstock quite. I'm going to try and exaggerate this, and then I'm going to use my VersaMark because it's my go-to ink, and I'm not going to prep the surface on my cardstock because I want to see what that embossing powder actually does. So using VersaMark to stamp my image, and this is onto Secret C cardstock. I'm not going to show you why to do this with the scrap paper. So I'm going to take some, let's white. So open this up. You want to make sure you don't have a fan on your room. That's going to get a little messy as well. So sprinkle this on. I'm going to tap this off and you'll notice how it's gone everywhere. And I can tap off some more and it's still really, really messy. So I'm going to zoom in so you can really see, so you can see all of those granules and powder that's just kind of everywhere. And this is happening because I didn't prep my cardstock before I actually stamped. It's a little bit cleaner, but it's really not a good impression. So I'm going ahead and actually heat set this so you can actually see what it looks like. Even though I don't have a good impression, I just want to show you what it looks like after it looks like. But first off, I'm going to actually funnel my remaining of my powder back into the jar by bending my paper. So just now, some people would actually use the same paper for other colors of embossing powders as well. I don't want the risk of possibly putting my white powder into, I don't want to put some into a jar of a different color. So I'm actually just going to fold this up. I'm just going to put that straight in the trash. That's why sometimes you use some scratch paper or a printout from your computer or some scrap paper. So instead use it in your crafting and recycle it there first and then you can throw it out later. Now I'm going to come in and start some heat embossing. So this is the first time that I'm holding my heat tool for today. So I'm going to let it turn on and I'm going to let it run for about 15 to 30 seconds till it has a chance to heat up. And then I'm going to bring it to my project. This makes it so that all of that preheating time isn't spent on putting it onto my cardstock, which could result in warping. It's like when you're putting baking in the oven, you always want to preheat your oven first. So we're going to preheat our heat tool so that we get the best results with our heat embossing. So now I'm going to bring it over and so I'm going to zoom in so you can actually see what's happening. And you want to hold it away from your work surface because it could actually melt your mat as well. So I'm keeping it kind of moving. You can see how that's changing. So it was very visible, that change of that embossing powder actually melting. Some right here didn't really hit, so it's kind of flaking off, but not all of it. But you can actually see how messy that is down here. So now I'm going to use the same cardstock, but this time I'm actually going to prep it with my embossing powder. So it's actually going to put a little bit of a film of powder, but that's okay. I can brush that away later. So let's try again with the VersaMark ink. I'm going to use my little tool right here. Let's go with gold. And then I'm just going to put the extra over it as well. And then the way you can funnel this one here out is you simply undo this here and then it can funnel that out. It does come with a little brush, so I'm just going to brush all the little bits out and then I can get, so then you can actually get a wet wipe and you can actually wipe that out to clean the residue or that excess powder that's actually on there as well. So now let's go back again with our heat tool and let's heat this up. Now it's not going to take as long to heat up because I've already been using it. So you can see how shiny that now is. Now for embossing powders that are meant to be shiny, that is actually what you're looking for. That's when you know that you're done heating up the embossing powder. Now, if you're using a matte embossing powder, I wouldn't really suggest starting with that when you first learn out how to emboss, just because it's a little bit tricky. You really have to watch the surface of the paper and of the granules just to make sure that they're melted or not. It's a little bit harder to see, but if you use an embossing powder like a regular embossing powder or like a metallic embossing powder that has quite a bit of shine on it, like it's heated and melted, you're going to do great. All you have to do is just make sure that you're moving your project around until you see it in the light and so you can actually see when that actually happens. When it happens, immediately stop heating. If you have some areas that have got some little granules around it, like you haven't embossed all the way, go back and zap that again. It's really not a problem. So now that we have done the basics of heat embossing, let's go ahead and create a project together. So I have got here, got some old olive cardstock, and then I have my 2 3/8 of an inch circle punch. So I'm just going to punch that out, and we are going to, I need a little bit of scrap. What can I use as my scrap? I'll use this as my scrap paper to stamp on. Let's start with some VersaMark ink. I'm going to use the same tree or branch that we've been using for our examples as well. Okay, so I just want to stamp this pretty much 3 times. I want it to take on a tone-on-tone effect. So you obviously could also use the same ink that is the colour of the cardstock, but I quite like the tone-on-tone effect with the VersaMark. It kind of has a little bit lighter on the outside. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat set this because I want that ink, that VersaMark ink, as we mentioned before, is a pigment ink. So it's kind of sticky and it kind of sits on top there. And I really need this to be dry so we can work on the next part of our project. So I'm going to put this on heat setting number 1. I'm just going to heat it up a little bit and then I'm just going to bring it to my project and dry off that ink. Okay, so just touching it. It is a bit hot still. So I just wait for it to cool down. Now the way to test it to see whether or not it has dried, I'm going to grab my embossing buddy, go over the top of that, is to literally dump on some embossing powder. And then if it sticks, you know it hasn't dried. Okay, so it hasn't dried yet. So I'm going to rub that all off. And then I can zap that with my heat tool again until that completely dries. But because we don't have time to sit and wait, I've done one earlier. So here's my PC that should have already been dry. And the reason why I want it dry is because I'm going to emboss over the top of it in another colour. So I've got my embossing buddy here and I've got, so the stamp set that I am working with today is the Magic of Hope, which is actually found in the September to December catalogue. So you'll be able to find it in there. So I'm going to let's add this with embossing powder, VersaMark ink. This is my little bow. I'm going to put this smack in the middle and I want white on here, so let's get rid of that, and hopefully this will only stick to my little bow that I've got there. I'm going to use a brush just to get rid of that excess. So let's heat set this. I'm actually going to hold it with tweezers so I don't burn my little fingers. So it's going to, once again, I'm going to put this to the side, heat it up, and then we'll bring it in to heat our project. We also don't want it too close to the work surface because we don't want to actually burn our work surface. So we're going to gradually move it around and you'll be able to see how it's just changing colour. Now I've already gone ahead and I've done that on multiple different colours as well. So I've got Cloud Cover, Real Red, Petal Pink and Mossy Meadow. And here is my card base, which is of Secret Sea. Just wipe my surface down because I can feel all of that embossing powder everywhere. And we are going to simply stack these on top like that. So let's adhere all of this down. So my card base here is 21 centimeters by 20 centimeters. And then I've scored that in half at the 10 centimeter mark to create a slim line card like so. Then I've also gone ahead and I've stamped my greeting onto black ink and I've heat embossed that in white also. Let's trim the ends. I'm going to just create a little banner. Oops, that didn't go too well. And I'm going to add some baker's twine to the back of that. So I have some red and white baker's twine here. So I'm going to like tie a bow basically, and then let's pop that up with some dimensional adhesive if I knew where it was. Here it is, and let's stick that about there. And then I'm going to finish it off with, so I'm just trying to find some little dots that we can use. So just go through my stash. I want something that's white. I've got those. Oh, here we go. I think our natural matte dots are going to work beautifully on here. So let's add a couple here as well. And there you go. There is our card. So let's recap what we've done. We have actually stamped with VersaMark ink to create a tone-on-tone effect, and then we've heat embossed our little bows in between all of that there as well. So there's our little slimline card. So let me share with you a couple of other examples of using heat embossing and how we can utilize that. So I just have 2 or 3 examples for you here. So this one here I've shared before is our using clear embossing powder. So I've stamped this in clear actually, and then I've gone over the top with a blending brush and done like a kind of lifted that color out as well. Here's one where I've just stamped my greeting and then put it on a label. And then last I've actually stamped this one here in gold. And you can see then I've cut that out, so gold on white. So it kind of gives that little bit of a shimmer as well. So there is cards. Move everything out of the way. So why not give the heat embossing technique a try, and I'll catch you next week for another fun technique. Bye for now.